Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Today, we'll learn why the rates of mental health challenges are so high among physicians and the wider implications.
Physician mental health is not just a workforce issue, it's a public health imperative. When our caregivers are suffering, our patients suffer too.
Then we'll speak with a UW professor who collaborated with Bad Bunny on his award-winning album.
Bad Bunny was like that primo, that cousin that mated. And so everyone in Puerto Rico is proud of having that cousin that is on a global stage. So I think there's a sense of Benito belonging to us.
Plus, we'll speak with a local artist who paints signs you probably recognize around Milwaukee. All that's coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Thanks for joining us today. The rates of depression, anxiety, and PTSD are higher among physicians compared to the general population. Unfortunately, this problem isn't improving, as at least one physician in the U.S. dies by suicide every day. Despite the proven effectiveness of treating mental health conditions, most physicians don't seek help. So why does this treatment gap exist, and what barriers are preventing it from closing? Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld looked into this issue firsthand and co-authored a study that shares a few solutions to reduce barriers to mental health care for physicians. Dr. Ehrenfeld joins me now to share more and starts by explaining why mental health challenges are prevalent among physicians and others in the medical field. As a note to our listeners, our conversation has mentions of suicide.
You know, we've got a bunch of problems. Stigma, unfortunately, in America today, it's not okay to raise your hand if you have a problem, and that extends to physicians and other healthcare professionals. And the culture of medicine just has not changed today to allow people to ask for help. And unfortunately, we find ourselves, I'm a physician, I see patients a couple days a month, working in a system that unfortunately is full of systematic challenges, frustrations, moral injury when I can't get the care that my patients need because the insurance company denied it. All of those things create an environment that unfortunately leads to a lot of physicians having mental health challenges higher than we would expect based on population statistics.
Obviously, you've been through this process yourself. You've had multiple roles, but you are a physician. You know these problems intimately. So can you share some of your motivations to actually research this topic and co-author this study and dive into it in an academic way?
Yeah, for me, this is deeply personal. I lost a med school classmate, a resident in one of my training programs, and a colleague in one of my practices to suicide. And each of those deaths haunts me. And I think not just about my colleagues that I lost that aren't here and their families. I think about the thousands, hundreds of thousands of patients who will never be cared for by them and what that means for the health of our state and our nation because this problem extends everywhere. So for me, I know there's more that we need to be doing so that it's okay to raise your hand and ask for help when you're at that point, regardless of who you are, and that we make the systems easier for people to work in so they don't get to that point to begin with.
I'm very sorry for all of your losses, and unfortunately it's something that will continue. I feel like COVID brought this issue of physician mental health into a larger focus, but it hasn't really improved since then, right? So what are the barriers that deter or can even prevent physicians from seeking help?
So they're logistical barriers, and I feel this. You know, physicians don't call in sick. I don't want to let down my patients. You know, I'm an anesthesiologist, and if I'm not there, surgery is not happening. And the burden that creates for families, for patients who took time off, got things organized, or expecting to have their procedure done, for my colleagues, or my colleagues may have to step in if I'm not there. People don't call in sick. There's a culture that expects you to show up. I don't want to let people down. And yet, I think we did realize during COVID that you shouldn't show up if you're coughing on people, that you should take that day off. But unfortunately, that still just doesn't happen. And so, unfortunately, the time constraints around, well, how do I actually get help for myself? It's a little easier now with, telehealth services and things after hours. But most medical services are, 9 to 5. Try to get an office appointment on a Saturday, especially with a behavioral health specialist. Good luck. There are also a lot of concerns about confidentiality. Most of our healthcare systems in the state have very well-developed employee assistance programs where there are resources, there may be counseling, there may be professional psychologists or psychiatrists, but people are afraid to use them. They're afraid that their colleagues are going to find out, that they will lose confidentiality. And we've seen this. We've seen this play out in Wisconsin. There was a wonderful program that is being sponsored by the Wisconsin Medical Society using a telehealth platform that's very specific for physicians. As soon as they rolled that program out, and I don't know all the details to their members, they saw immediate uptake. And that uptake, just based on who it was made available to, was from physicians in health systems where there are very robust employee assistance programs. So we know that there's this unmet demand out there. A lot of logistical barriers, confidentiality constraints, time constraints are preventing people from getting the help that they need.
Well, and outside of logistics that I feel like we all struggle with, and then physicians tenfold because your days are so packed, but there are actually professional consequences, right? If someone seeks out help, if, like you said, the fear of someone knowing that they are going through a mental health struggle could reflect poorly on their professional outlook.
Not only reflect poorly, one could lose their license or not be credentialed to work at a hospital. And for decades, every time a physician fills out a licensing application here in Wisconsin, anywhere in the country, a very broad, very intrusive, very inappropriate question has been asked. Have you ever, at any point in your career, received psychiatric, psychological counseling help or been hospitalized at any point? Now, questions that ask about current impairment, fine. But I'll tell you what happened to my friend Miriam. We were residents together, and she's incredible. Gifted physician, one of the best. She graduated and went to get her medical license in another state. She actually checked the box that she had received help. She had gotten counseling in high school. She's an incredibly well-adjusted, high-performing physician with no impairment or problems. That held her license up for 6 months. People know that they're going to have to answer these questions. They know that when they get privileges at a hospital, they have to answer these questions. And so when they recognize that they need help, they're reluctant to do so. And we're starting to see change. And there's been a huge national effort here in Wisconsin, across the country, to get health system credentialing forms changed, to get medical licensing form changed, and do it not just for physicians, but for all licensed healthcare professionals, because it's just not okay to have these intrusive questions.
I want to talk about culture, too. For physicians and people who are studying to become doctors, starting in med school through residency to wherever they end up, what is the culture like in healthcare settings when it comes towards attitudes about mental health? Because it is a high-stress environment. No one doubts that. Everyone knows there's stress. There's high pressure. There's always the pressure to perform, to get accepted into your next steps. And we can only assume, yes, everyone is stressed. Maybe there's other mental health problems, but is it just not something you talk about, even with your peers?
It's not. We reward stoicism. You're expected to be, quote, a strong student, a strong resident, a strong physician. I cannot tell you the hundreds of times I've heard those exact words uttered from my colleagues, my faculty, my peers, students who want to be seen as that. They want to be seen as somebody who doesn't have vulnerability, which is not the reality. We all have vulnerability. We all have moments where we need help, where we need to take a day off, where something's happened in our family and we need to take care of ourselves. But that's not acknowledged historically. And we're starting to see that culture shift, but it hasn't happened fast enough, and there's a lot more that we need to do.
You can speak just to your personal experience here, but do physicians feel like their mental health needs to be triaged, like it's only to be addressed when it gets too bad to ignore?
Unfortunately, we see a lot of physicians who self-prescribe, who try to take care of it on their own. which is never a good idea, who ask a peer, often inappropriately, to help take care of themselves because they're worried about sort of going through the system as it is today because of confidentiality or other kinds of things. And those things obviously need to change. And there are a lot of opportunities, right, to bring on board strategic solutions that can not just reduce stigma, but make it easier for everybody, including physicians, to access behavioral health services.
Yeah, as you mentioned, to put a number on that comment, your report cited that 75% of interns expressed a preference for self-managing mental health conditions. And this attitude starts off early on in the process of their medical career. So when we look at the big picture, the institutional challenges, because of this, do you think there needs to be longer-term changes to, say, the residency system to set up physicians to help reduce these extra stressors that contribute to a decline in mental health?
Yeah, I think there have been some good reforms in our training programs, and there are national standards that require training about recognition of burnout, recognition of needing help. But just because you go through the training or you click through the online module doesn't mean that you're actually willing to do that. And I think that there's an important role that physicians who are in practice have to model that behavior. And we're starting to see that. We're starting to see that certainly in the places that I've worked, in the places I've spoken with around the country. But again, it's not happening fast enough. And unfortunately, every day that goes by that we lose another physician, another nurse, another dentist, another pharmacist to suicide is too many.
And with big institutions, there's also differences of implementation, right? There's state, federal, there's differences of schools. I imagine that's a massive problem because none of this is going to be like a blanket, consistent thing. No matter where you go to med school, this is the program you're going to get.
Yeah, if you've seen one medical school, one training program, one hospital, you've seen one hospital, one training program, one medical school.
Yeah.
And every place has a different approach to this, a different culture, different systems in place. We're starting to see some efforts, and we're funding some of those efforts here in Wisconsin at the Advancing Healthcare Wisconsin Endowment to create a shared framework, shared measurement, shared systems, but it hasn't really happened at scale today.
We can talk about Wisconsin, and before we get into this, I'm just going to take a moment to reintroduce you. This is Lake Effect. I'm Audrey Nowakowski, speaking with Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld of the Medical College of Wisconsin, and we're talking about physician mental health. So given that things are going to change depending on what school, what hospital, what state you're in, let's focus on Wisconsin. And you mentioned one resource, but what other resources are currently available for physicians? I know there's programs like SOS Peer Supporters, but that's people who volunteer to be support. But is there work to be a separate entity that is there for physicians?
Yeah, so today, Wisconsin is one of 3 states that does not have a physician health program, a confidential place that folks can go when they need help. 47 states have one, we don't. And we need that. But we don't just need it for physicians, we need it for everybody. There's one state in the nation that does have a universal program for all licensed healthcare practitioners. That's Ohio. And the Advancing Healthcare Wisconsin Endowment made a $2.5 million grant to the Wisconsin Medical Society to work with all of the health professionals associations around the state and the state to bring online a program that can service everybody. And we're really excited about that. We think that's a really, really important step because we need someone that if you're a nurse who's depressed, if you're a physician who's suicidal, if you're a pharmacist who's having a drug problem, you have somewhere confidential that you trust to go. And I think it's one of the most important investments that we've made in this space.
Let's talk about wider implications. When it comes to mental health challenges among physicians and everyone who is involved in these healthcare systems, it's truly like a public health issue, right? Because it trickles down. How does it widely affect everyone they interact with, no matter the level?
Yeah, so physician mental health is not just a workforce issue. It's a public health imperative. When our caregivers are suffering, our patients suffer too. And we can't have a healthy, thriving community state if we don't have a healthy, thriving workforce to take care of them. When physicians are depressed, quality goes down. When people are having struggles, then you may be absent from work. We see this in any industry, but that has profound implications for the health of our communities when it's the healthcare workers themselves who are struggling. So the frightening and frustrating part is despite the effectiveness of cognitive behavioral therapy, of mental health treatments, most physicians don't seek help when they need it. And we've seen that survey after survey after survey. People who know that they're at that point, 6 out of 10 don't get the help that they need.
What do you see as the biggest limitation right now?
So again, I think it's stigma, it's culture, it's fear of professional consequences, and the logistical barriers. We just have not made it easy for people to get the help, even if they're ready to.
How do you think we can change the culture, especially on such a wide scale? It's this institutional norms, right, that we're fighting against.
I think there are definitely things that we can do, and some places have flipped the model. Instead of raising your hand in residency program and saying, I need some support, I need some help, programs have implemented these opt-out sort of paradigms where they normalize mental health engagement by making it a routine part of training and scheduling everybody for a 20-minute check-in. And you can opt out of it, but the default is that you're going to go talk to somebody about how things are going, to do a quick screening, to see if there's anything that maybe needs to be addressed. So I think that's really important. There are definitely opportunities for modeling, from leadership when a leader shares their own mental health struggle or their challenges or their journey. That breaks the stigma and that builds trust. And I've seen that in many cases, and I think that that's a really important way to change the culture.
Especially when it comes to newer doctors and people just entering med school. What would you recommend to them to try to move this needle if they're afraid of maybe that their professor or their doctor is not modeling the same behavior?
Well, again, I think one of the most important places to get support is from your peers. And, I was lucky. I had a lot of challenges in medical school. I did fail an exam once, and I thought it was the end of the world. And I still remember a faculty mentor, put her hand around my shoulder and said, it's going to be okay. I remember the day in residency, and I was like a senior resident near the end of my training, and I didn't get something right in the operating room, and I kind of got scolded for it. And one of my faculty said, well, I can't believe you're not operating at the level like a junior person. And I bawled and I broke down in tears. And I still remember wandering into a trusted colleague's office and just losing it, and her, picking me back up, telling me, you're going home. That's it. And we'll revisit this tomorrow, and being there to help me through. And so for folks who are out there, I think regardless of your profession, regardless of where you are, finding those peers who can support you in those moments, because we all have them, right? We all have bad days. We all have moments where you just need somebody to give you a perspective and tell you it's going to be okay. And that may be a spouse, that may be a family member, but it may be somebody at work or that you can trust.
So to localize this, given that things change depending on where people are listening, what would you recommend someone in the Milwaukee area? They're struggling, they need a resource, and they're not comfortable seeking it out in their workplace. Where should they go? I got to tell you, the 988 crisis line is an incredible resource. And what's great about that is it's easy to remember, it's universal, and it's a place to connect, right? It's not a particular resource, it's a connection point. And it's pretty good. We've done a lot of work to shore that up across the state of Wisconsin. There's always work to do. There are gaps. But I would tell you, anybody who's needing a starting place, that's a great way to dial in. Well, Dr. Ehrenfeld, thank you so much for joining me today to talk more about this very important issue. I appreciate your time and sharing your experience.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Jesse Ehrenfeld is the Executive Director of the Advancing a Healthier Wisconsin Endowment at the Medical College of Wisconsin, where he's also a tenured professor of anesthesiology. You can find the study Dr. Ehrenfeld co-authored about reducing barriers to mental health care for physicians, as well as links to resources at wuwm.com. Did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Later in the show, a local artist who makes handmade signs tells us about his craft. But first, we'll hear from a UW professor who collaborated with Bad Bunny on his album that just won a Latin Grammy for Album of the Year. Keep listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. Bad Bunny's sixth studio album, Debí Tirarmos Fotos, won Album of the Year at the Latin Grammys last week.
Gracias.
It was released earlier this year to rave reviews, in part because of the weaving of Puerto Rico's history, politics, and diaspora throughout the album. Bad Bunny had help from a UW-Madison assistant professor. Jarrell Melendez-Badillo created 17 brief visual history lessons for the songs, which are all on YouTube. WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez talked to Melendez-Badillo about how the collaboration happened and what history Bad Bunny wanted to share about Puerto Rico.
I feel like every Puerto Rican I know is a Bad Bunny fan, as well as the whole world at this point. What about Bad Bunny, the music, the artistry, really kind of appeals to you in both a historical way and a scholarly way?
I guess I'll start by saying that I have this colleague, Yarimar Bonilla, who teaches at Princeton, and I read that she once said that Bad Bunny was like that primo, that cousin that mated. And so everyone in Puerto Rico is proud of having that cousin that is on a global stage. So I think there's a sense of Benito belonging to us. Now, on a more academic side, I think that, the Bad Bunny phenomenon is super interesting to me because I think there's a before and after Benito. He broke all the rules in the genre when he came out. Reggaeton was a hyper masculine, macho sort of aesthetic, and then he started painting his nails. He sort of queered reggaeton in a way. Also, he got to this global platform speaking Spanish and not losing that. So I think it's that Benito marks a turning point. In fact, my book, Puerto Rico National History, is a history of Puerto Rico from pre-Columbian times to Bad Bunny, because I think that the Bad Bunny phenomenon is so fascinating. And the book that I have a chapter on with Professor Santiago Ortiz is called The Bad Bunny Enigma. And it's a bunch of scholars just trying to grapple with this question that you just posed. What is it about Bad Bunny that is so fascinating, right?
Right. And your work together covers 500 years of history, from pre-Columbian history to current day. And I want to kind of get into that collaborative process, because the end product, which you can see online, which is these kind of explainers of Puerto Rican history, little snapshots of Puerto Rican history on Bad Bunny's YouTube page. How did that all come together, and how did you all decide what history you would dig into?
So the mandate was basically that they wanted history, or Benito wanted history to accompany the visualizers in YouTube. And so at first I thought it was niche sort of Puerto Rican history, unknown Puerto Rican history. But Benito came back and said, part of the problem is that any history of Puerto Rico is unknown, even to Puerto Ricans. And so it was this balance of sort of offering people a general history of the archipelago and its people and its diaspora, and more specific sort of themes and topics. And so I think that, for me, having written a history of Puerto Rico from pre-Columbian times to Bad Bunny in 200 pages or less prepared me to write 17 visualizers of short narratives.
The first narrative, or the visualizer as they're called, that I would love to get into is the opening track on the album, which I'm guessing there's some significance there, Nueva York, which I'm looking at the numbers right now online, and we're in excess of 38 million. Will you ever write anything more popular as a history professor? Can I get you just to maybe read a little bit of it in Spanish and then translate a little bit of that in English, what the message is that you wanted to get across?
Absolutely. So before I go into the lines, I just want to say that I really enjoyed that Benito put this song first in the record, because I think it's an homage to that diasporic Puerto Rican and Caribbean culture in the States and abroad. And so the record doesn't start in San Juan or in Manatí or Vega Baja. It starts in the most Caribbean place in the world, in Nueva York. Nueva York! And so the visualizer, the text, is called La Bandera Puertorriqueña, 1895 a 1952. Luego de varios siglos de colonización española, comenzó a surgir un... So in this slide, what I wanted to do was to begin by saying that the first time that we are referred to in the colonial record is in a pejorative manner. The Spanish colonial officers were calling us bastards, and how Puerto Ricans have always resignified the pejorative ways that people have addressed us. And also to talk a little bit about the Puerto Rican flag itself and how it was not created in Manatí. It was actually created in New York City. And so it tells the story of the Puerto Rican flag and how it was unveiled in 1895 at the Cuban Revolutionary Party's committee, which had a Puerto Rico section. And so it signified the combined struggle for independence of Cuba and Puerto Rico. And although it was later incorporated by the Puerto Rican government, it was illegal for some time to have the Puerto Rican flag. It has a revolutionary origin, and it has a diasporic origin as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the next song I would love for us to get into is the actual album title track, Debí tirar más fotos, which there's also a short video as well. And this is not an original thought, but it was a thought that I had just listening to the album and watching these videos, is the evolution of him as an artist, the evolution of reggaeton, the incorporation of Afro-Caribbean instruments and sound. If we can get a breakdown here as well, that would be great.
Absolutely. So I did not get to decide which text went with which song, but I think that the team did a wonderful and beautiful job merging them together. And one thing I'll say is that this particular slide was something that Benito wanted. He wanted something about the history of plena and bomba, which are these two Afro-Caribbean rhythms, and how they are the basis of reggaeton. De la plena y la bomba al reggaetón 1500 a 1990. La borinqueña, la canción que luego pasará.
El perreo, la salsa, la bomba y la plena. Chequéate la mía, cómo es que suena.
Bomba and plena are two Afro-Caribbean rhythms that were understood as noise. They were actually police. People were arrested or fined for playing bomba and plena. As close as last year, there was an incident in the southern part of Puerto Rico where the cops were called on people that were playing bomba. And so how it became the basis of reggaeton, sort of to also pay homage to the Afro-Caribbean dimension of reggaeton. Because Manito has talked about, being a white Puerto Rican, but reggaeton in its essence is an Afro-Caribbean rhythm.
Okay, so the last song that I would love for you to break down for me is my favorite song on the album, Baile Inolvidable. I'm guessing it's more than just a heartbreak song or a longing song. So if you could do me the honor of breaking down what this song is going for and what the message is on the visualizers that are accompanying the music.
Absolutely. So Baile Inolvidable, I think it's a great song because although salsa is in the record from the get-go and throughout the record, I think it was his attempt of playing around with the sounds of salsa while paying tribute to that music that basically raised a lot of us in Puerto Rico. And so in this particular slide, I was talking about the creation of the Commonwealth in Puerto Rico. Estas acciones aspiraban a tomar la atención internacional. Es en este contexto, tanto local como internacional, que el Congreso de los Estados Unidos aprobó la Ley 600, permitiendo a los puertorriqueños crear una nueva forma de gobierno. And so one of the things that I wanted to do with this slide is to heed to Anito's call that a lot of the history that should be general, that should be well known amongst Puerto Ricans is unknown. And so this is talking about the creation of the Puerto Rican Commonwealth in 1952, which is the current political status that we have, but also talking about the agency of Puerto Ricans. We were talking earlier about how we're often infantilized in media, and it goes all the way back to 1898 when the United States invaded Puerto Rico, and they produced cartoons of Puerto Ricans as children, as women in distress. And so it was a way of also talking about the agency that we've had throughout our history, and that contrary to some beliefs, we're not docile, but we are. It's a history of indocility, the history of Puerto Rico.
Thinking about your work and Bad Bunny's work and how those messages in history reach or don't reach Boricuas in Wisconsin, I'm looking at some numbers here that we have in excess of 65,000 here in the state. And I know we've hit on the fact that this history is so unknown and inaccessible. And for a lot of folks, it's just not realistic to get back to the island. So what are the challenges in keeping in touch with what's happening in Puerto Rico at this time? And then what does an album like this do to bridge that gap?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think that is a question that a lot of scholars and non-scholars and Puerto Ricans have been thinking a lot about, precisely because there's more Puerto Ricans in the diaspora than in the archipelago. And in my work, one of the ways that I've sought to address that is that when writing a general history of Puerto Rico, I incorporated the Puerto Rican diaspora as part of the narrative, which is a simple narrative move, but it had not been done previously. Our general history books did not take into consideration the Puerto Rican diaspora. And shout out to all the Puerto Ricans in Wisconsin and all the Latinx community as well, because I'm part of a big Mexican community in Madison. Those are my neighbors, the people that I rock with. But to your point, I think, and to your question, I think that this record is doing something incredible by positioning itself in New York from the first song onwards, because it's a nod and a recognition about the importance of Caribbean and Latinx culture, not only in the Caribbean and in Latin America, but also in the United States, right? And it doesn't mean that struggle is less important than what's happening in Puerto Rico. Yes, what's happening in Puerto Rico is brutal. We go through power outages on an almost daily basis, lack of infrastructure. I guess that this record, what it offers is a way of connecting with a sense of Puerto Ricanness, that sort of affirmation. And, I never understood why Puerto Ricans in the diaspora were so cling to their flag until I got to be a diasporic Puerto Rican 11 years ago. And now I have the flag in my car. I have the flag in my socks. I think that a record like this one seeks to bridge that gap. And it just makes us proud of being who we are, but also acknowledging the challenges and difficulties of our people.
I've heard you call this album a snapshot of the present moment we're in, which, if that's the case, Debí tirar más fotos is the perfect album title. But if it is a snapshot, who is Bad Bunny leaving that snapshot for? And what does he want the island to look like in the future?
I think that in the last few years, Bad Bunny has become more aware of himself as a political actor and recognize his political agency. This is not new. The first time he appeared on national television, it was in the Tonight Show, and he used that stage to talk about a murder of a trans woman in Puerto Rico. He used the platform he had in El Apagón, that song that he dropped, and then all of a sudden you're watching the video and it becomes a documentary on gentrification, right? So it's not new that he's using his platform. I think it's a snapshot because, we are at a moment where we're being displaced. There's a wealthy class that's being attracted by the government through a series of incentives that makes Puerto Rico a tax haven for millionaires. We are at a moment where rapid gentrification is displacing communities in the island. We're losing our culture. And so I think that Benito is very aware of what's happening, and he's very vocal about it. And I think Debí tirar más fotos, Lo que le pasó a Hawaii, what happened to Hawaii, is another very political song in which he's talking about colonialism, displacement, and gentrification. And so I guess that the future that Benito wants is one where him and his people can stay in Puerto Rico if they so want it and have a decent living.
That was Jorel Melendez-Badillo, a UW-Madison assistant professor of history and author of Puerto Rico, A National History. He collaborated with Bad Bunny on his Grammy-winning album Debí Tirarmos Fotos. He spoke to WUWM's Jimmy Gutierrez earlier this year. We'll take one more break, and then we'll meet a local sign maker and tell you about some of his work you might recognize around Milwaukee. That's when Lake Effect returns on WUWM.
Gracias mami por parirme aquí. Ey, el mejor de la nueva porque me crié en la vieja. Gracias a mami y papi por todos los jalos en oreja. Nunca me han visto en la calle ni en los podcasts ando queja. Tratan de medir fuerza y no pueden ni en pareja. Calle sol, calle luna, estrella en la noche oscura. Yo no canto reggae, pero sí cultura de Borinca en PR, archipiélago perfecto. En el mundo entero ya conocen mi dialecto, mi jerga.
This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. You're likely familiar with the painted logos of businesses like Ruby's Bagels, or murals like El Paletero in Walker's Point, which shows an ice cream cart vendor. But do you know the artist that's behind them? Michael Cerda is a sign painter, music producer, and owner of Cerda Design Company. He was just nominated for his second Grammy for his work on the album God Does Like Ugly with rapper J.I.D. But many Milwaukeeans will be familiar with his art that you can see around town. Cerda joins Lake Effect's Excrit Nunez to talk about how Milwaukee inspires his art.
Michael, your signs are all over the city, but a lot of people might not be familiar with you as the artist behind them. I'm curious how you got inspired to become a graphic designer and sign painter.
Well, it all started as a kid. I grew up drawing, always loved art, and as I got older, I struggled finding ways to make money off of it because just living as an adult and in the real world, you need to make money along with doing what you love. So I tried a bunch of different stuff. I did airbrushing at the mall. I did logos for friends and family. Drew pictures when I was younger for like a few quarters or like a few bucks here and there, just finding any ways to have it make sense. And then I found graphic design being like a good middle ground or like a good balance between like doing what I like and then something that could be considered like a real job. So I dove headfirst into that by going to METC, graduated after 2 years with my associates in graphic design and used that to land work. And then I still love doing design, but I was curious about other ways that I could pursue art. And then I found sign painting because of typography and like layout design and all that just kind of worked together. And being from Milwaukee, I was exposed to these old signs on the buildings that are like super faded. They're called ghost signs. And I was really curious as to how those signs got up there. And doing some digging around, you find out that it was done by a human being with a brush. And it was called sign painting. So I started doing my research, and to my surprise, there wasn't a ton of tutorials online of how to do like this really old school thing. So I just kind of relied on trial and error, bought brushes, paint, and used the knowledge that I had at the moment to just kind of teach myself how to become a sign painter. And over the course of the year of learning, I met some OGs. There's a sign painter named Jeff Williams that has done a ton of work here in the city that I took a class with him for a little bit. And other friends that had similar interests that we just kind of shared tips and tricks and stuff. And I just fell into sign painting, became obsessed, and made it my full-time, or kind of like my full-time job, along with my graphic design and my music production work.
I see a lot of like creativity, but a lot of history and research and mentorship too. That's kind of crafted.
It's really important. Yeah.
Who you are right now.
Absolutely.
To follow up with that, is there someone or something that sparked that creativity or interest in becoming an artist?
Yeah. There's a few things that are really important. I think my environment as a kid really affected me choosing art. My parents are awesome. They really allowed me to explore that side of my brain a little bit. But I have like a memory of my dad would be on the phone talking to my grandparents back in Mexico, and he would sit me on his lap as he was on the phone, and he'd be doodling on a napkin. And it was always like the side profile of a man's head. And I would just see it and I would be like, how is he doing that with like this pen? Like I'm a little kid and I'm just watching him draw this head. And that just like sparked my curiosity of like, I want to do that. So taking pen to paper and just started drawing myself and just I haven't stopped since. But again, going back to the environment that they provided for me was just like they encouraged me to pursue art. Obviously, they might have had some pushback when I got older as far as like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you can't make that much money. But that's just them being good parents. You know, they wanted the best for me. But I had to be a little bit a stubborn individual to be like, shh, I got this. I'm gonna try this. So yeah, I think just a mixture of seeing my dad draw for the first time and then having that safe environment to really pursue it.
That's really beautiful and
Yeah.
amazing that you had that supportive environment.
Yeah.
Something that I notice about your work is your attention to detail with typography. When I see it, I notice it's very sleek and it has a lot of character. Where do you get your inspiration from for letters?
As of late, inspiration comes from just driving around. I love cruising around Milwaukee and documenting the signs that I see. Like if you go through my camera roll on my phone, the majority of it is literally either screenshots that I find on Instagram or photos that I take of old signs. I think there's a lot to be learned from like past work. A lot of it is just kind of like repurposing what already works and just kind of adding my own style on top. I think within design and typography and stuff, there are certain rules you have to follow for things to look good, but there is still a lot of room to be creative with the way you dress up letters. Inspiration also comes from my graffiti background. As a teenager, I did graffiti. Back then, I didn't know what I was really doing. I just thought it was like, hip hop, graffiti. It was like I was obsessed with it, right? But I was working with letters. It's essentially typography and like design and layout, just in a really like rough, raw way. I was kind of training myself on how to work with letters and style, like developing a style. With graffiti, it's all about how do you dress up the letter A, the B, C to be your own unique thing. And being able to establish that really early helped me now as a professional to explore different styles and ways of letter treatment to come up with unique stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So some businesses that you've designed for include Ruby's Bagels, Ebb and Flow in River West, Lilliput Records, and Pete's Pops. Why do you think so many local businesses ask you to paint their signs?
To be honest, like, I'm going to take a wild guess. I mean, for the Ruby's Bagels, she is my beautiful girlfriend, and my role in the business is to help with the design and the signs. And she's given me the amazing opportunity to kind of like be a part of like her brand, to help create her brand. And a big part of it is the hand-painted signs. And I think she appreciates like the handmade element of my work. She makes the hand-rolled bagels, so the hand-painted signs, it just kind of works really well. As far as my other clients, I think they just, again, appreciate like the human touch, where if you were to go with like a vinyl sign, as clean and perfect as it is, there's not much story there. There's more story with a hand-painted sign because it's not perfect. If you go up close to it, you'll notice that the lines aren't perfectly straight. The corners aren't perfectly sharp. I try to get them as sharp as possible, but there's just like that human touch that you can't really replicate with vinyl. And also, too, like when you go to any small business, you go because you're doing your part to help their business and you're getting something unique in return. And the same can be said with the hand-painted sign. You're helping my small business and you're helping me kind of keep moving forward. And I'm giving you this unique thing that's a one-of-one that can't be replicated. It's an honor, really, to be able to be a part of like their journey and like their story. When I first started sign painting, that part didn't really click yet. But the more signs I did, I'm realizing like, wow, I'm being given a huge responsibility because the sign is usually the first thing that they're going to see when they walk up to the business, so it's got to look good and they're putting a lot of trust in me. And I take that very serious.
Yeah. And on top of designing and painting signs for businesses, you've also painted a few murals throughout the city.
Yep.
Your most recent mural was the El Paletero mural in Walker's Point. How did that opportunity come up and what does the paletero symbolize for you?
So that came up through, I was connected with Izzy Lugo he works with the Brewers. I was connected to him through a really good friend of mine, Jesus Gonzalez, which is the owner of Socolo Food Truck Park. And we were hanging out and he told me like, hey, there's an opportunity to work with the Brewers through Izzy. They're looking to do some murals. And I jumped on it right away. I reached out, we connected, we had a meeting. I had an idea that I pitched of like, there's this idea that I had way before the brewer thing of painting a paletero. First of all, I love the meaning behind it, the visual element, like the look. Maybe because it taps into like my childhood too. But I just wanted to do like a portrait style painting of a paletero. Just never got around to doing it, never found the perfect location for it. So this brewer thing came up, and it was the perfect opportunity to kind of like tie in everything about my childhood and like this story and this idea into one mural. And I feel like Walker's Point is like the perfect neighborhood for it. But I'd say the meaning and the message behind it is just to kind of highlight hardworking immigrants, kind of like the unsung heroes of our community. You know, we see them walking by, and some of us will stop. I feel like I'm the one to stop, buy a paleta, and just keep it moving. Other people don't really pay attention, you know. But the thing is, these people are out there day in, day out. They're working, they're grinding, even when it's raining. So I know there's a guy out there that'll be out there when it's still really cold. But they're out there just grinding, working. That's a really strong message, right? And I think the combination of the brewer's logo that says Milwaukee with the paletero sitting on top of it just, to me, felt like the perfect combination, you know? If you go up to the mural, I don't know how tall it is, but I want to say it's probably the tallest paletero mural. And being able to stand next to it and to look up, you know, it makes it feel really powerful. And, you know, I feel like it demands respect, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It is really powerful.
Yeah, thank you.
So your creativity also stems beyond painting. You're also a Grammy Award-winning music producer. One of your beats was picked up by Kanye West for his Jesus is King LP. Can you tell me how this opportunity came up for you?
Yeah, I've been doing music since I was a teenager, just making beats in my bedroom. And then a few years later, I want to say when I was like 25, 26, I transitioned into kind of like composing music. Because prior to that, I was sampling. Mm-hmm. So I was buying records. If anyone's familiar with the art of sampling within hip hop, you know, they take a record and they essentially chop up the audio to take certain pieces of that music to create a new composition by essentially adding drums on top, and it turns into a beat. A lot of your favorite rap songs, they're probably sampled from records. So I saw that there was a demand for original compositions and samples that producers and artists could use so they could clear it better. Let's say a big artist uses a record, they essentially have to clear it with the artist. And some of those fees can be kind of ridiculous, like really expensive. So I started composing my own original samples. So learning how to play the piano, guitar, and creating these compositions that sound like pieces of music that you would find on a record, but they're made by me. And if it gets used, I would provide, and I do provide, a really smooth process to get it cleared. Sometimes it's just a really simple fee, and I get a producer credit, and I get my share on publishing. It's just a much smoother, faster way to get things going. I was doing that, and I was working on some original music, I want to say 2018, 2019, and I got approached by this producer named Boogs the Beast out of Chicago, who works really closely with Kanye West. And I sent him a folder of some of my latest stuff that I was working on. He had asked for, it's called a pack. Like you send a pack, and it usually means send me whatever you're working on right now. A few weeks went by, and he messages me, and he says, can you hold a certain piece of music for me? Because I think Kanye is going to use it. I told this story a million times already, but it's like, when he told me that, I remember feeling like, not that he was lying, but it felt like too good to be true.
Yeah.
So I didn't get too excited. So I said, okay, I'll hold it. And then another few days goes by. He calls me and says, hey, we have a song on Kanye's album, Jesus is King. So please hold this. It's going to be used. And I think at that moment, it started to really sink in, like, I'm really about to be on Kanye's album. But where it really kind of like hit home and felt real was obviously when the album came out, which was 2019 in October. And playing it on Spotify for the first time, it was a surreal moment, seeing my name in the credits, hearing the sample being used by Kanye, and it completely changed my life and like the trajectory of my career, because I went from just a producer trying to figure out what he was going to do with his career living in Milwaukee to now a professional like industry producer living in Milwaukee still, but with Kanye West as a credit. And then time goes by, and then he gets nominated for a Grammy for top contemporary Christian album, and we end up winning. So going from just a producer now to Grammy award-winning producer within a year, very surreal, but super duper grateful. And it's just kind of it gave me the confidence I needed to keep pursuing music. And since then, I've been able to work with a ton of cool artists. Yeah,
and like you said, you've done it all from Milwaukee. So we're nearing towards the end of our conversation, but I kind of would like to reflect on everything we've talked about. What do you think is special about designing and painting for a city like Milwaukee?
Oh, it's special. I feel like it's like untapped potential here. I feel like a lot of people that are creatives, they tend to want to leave to go to other big cities to pursue art, music, and all that. But I think staying here was really important because there's a lot of stories to be told here yet. So the untapped potential. I love the fact that I get to do my work here because it's just kind of building up this city to be a creative hub. You know, I want there to be cool hand-painted signs on all the businesses and murals everywhere. And I want to be able to say, like, yeah, I'm working with big artists and going for my second Grammy, still living in Milwaukee. So to me, that's really important.
Well, Milwaukee is super lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Michael, thanks so much for speaking with me today. And it was really great to learn more about your work.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time.
Michael Cerda is a sign painter, Grammy Award-winning music producer, and owner of Cerda Design Company. He spoke with Lake Effect's Expert Nunez earlier this year. And that wraps up Lake Effect for today. I'm Audrey Nowakowski. If you've missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take us on the go, simply download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll learn about a nonprofit that helps people cope with a breast cancer diagnosis and provides support throughout treatment. Plus, we'll hear a new episode of our immigration podcast, Status Pending, about one woman's international student journey. Thank you so much for joining us today, right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.